I was born into a violent family. My father was an alcoholic Scot with a Native American in his lineage somewhere. My mother was an auburn-haired Irish girl who was naive but quick-tempered. Every day of my life was filled with arguments that turned violent. I became a panic-stricken, socially backward, messed-up kid, or as the kids at school called me, a retarded pansy. We lived in the Quad Cities area of North Alabama, a mile from the Tennessee River. The Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, owned the forested area. Those woods and the river were my sanctuary. I knew all the game trails, snake pits, and fishing holes for miles around, and I used to walk past the school bus stop and straight into the woods where I would spend my day in peace. At school, I was bullied and made fun of because I was a nervous and shy kid. Now I realized that I was suffering from severe social anxiety and panic attacks, a condition that was not studied in those days. I grew older and eventually collapsed into agoraphobia and became housebound. I only ventured out in the early morning hours to drive a newspaper route. This job allowed me to pay my bills but still be alone and isolated. It's difficult to describe the misery suffered by a housebound person, to be young and healthy yet afraid to walk out the door. In my mind, there was a monster just outside that door waiting to devour me. I thought I was insane, and that scared me even more. For years, I stayed inside, burying myself in pity because I couldn't live a normal life. I became jealous of others who were living the life I wanted, and that jealousy turned to resentment and eventually to pure hatred. I lived with my hatred and plotted my revenge. The insults and bullying never left my mind. Fantasies of punishing my tormentors began to consume me. The thoughts grew darker by the day. The torture methods I envisioned for my victims were only complete when at the last moment, before I killed them, I would reveal myself. I wanted them to see my face and regret the way they treated me. But insane or not, I never hurt anyone, even though the thoughts of revenge continued. And I wondered if this was the way serial killers got their start. When would I snap? Something strange was happening, though. The more of a monster I became in my own mind, the less I feared the monster beyond my door, and I began to venture out. Like in most neighborhoods, there are always the troublemakers. Kids who seem to always cause problems. If it's a bad thing to do, when it would be easier to do good, they always choose the bad. They get a kick out of picking on kids who just want to have fun. They seek out the innocent and prey on them. Most kids grow out of that phase. Adulthood has a way of taming the devil inside us, but some never learn, and you have to wonder if they were born to constantly be a burden on society. Seth was the worst in our neighborhood. He spent his days tormenting the younger, weaker kids. I was his special project, and even as an adult, he once drove by my house shouting insults while flipping me the bird. Seth had been on my list for years. Seth seemed to idolize all the hoods around our town. Eventually, he teamed up with another local punk who had a worse reputation. Tony was a criminal who had done time in prison. When he was released, he showed no rehabilitation and resumed the life he lived previously. Robbery, burglary, and intimidation were his forte. Tony and Seth were arrested not long after for crimes that would send Seth to trial on a rape charge and Tony to death for murder. Tony was later convicted and his death sentence was carried out. In January of 1984, they both sat in the county jail waiting to be transferred to a federal facility where they would be held until their trial. Careless guards left Seth's cell unlocked and he slipped out without them noticing he was gone for several hours. The story was soon breaking news on the TV. He was believed to be armed and considered dangerous. No one was to try to apprehend him without calling the police, and authorities didn't know where he was, but they were searching local woods. The image of Seth's mugshot covering the screen brought back the hate that had built inside me. I remembered seeing Seth and his buddies in years past in the woods where I went for peace and quiet. I knew he would run to anything familiar, and sure enough, not long after the story broke the news, police cars were running down my road. They were looking for him in that place I call sanctuary, but I also knew that he would need shelter. It was cold, and it had been snowing, and Seth wouldn't stay in the open if he could help it. I knew exactly where he would be. It would be several hours before I needed to begin my paper route. I had plenty of time. With my pistol, a knife, and a flashlight, I headed for the woods. More cars drove fast down the road as I climbed the hill behind my house. They were heading to the wrong place. Seth would have made it past those woods by now, so I picked a route that would take me away from the search area through the woods and to the place that I would go if I were on the run. I was going to find Seth and I was going to kill him. He had it coming. The snow had stopped and the clouds began to clear. The full moon lit my way, although I didn't need it. I hadn't been in those woods for years, since the agoraphobia took over my life, but I knew the woods better than my own house. I was headed to the river. Years before, the TVA had piled large concrete pipes or culverts on the bank. They had never been used in construction, and I played in and around those pipes for years. It would be the only shelter for miles on this cold night. I would quietly slip down the bank and approach the massive pipes from that direction. He would never think of anyone coming from the direction of the river. He would be looking toward the woods. After making it to the river 100 yards from the pipes, I creeped along the bank. I wasn't afraid, and that felt good to me. I was outside in the open air. The monster I had feared was outside my door, had not attacked. I was free, and I felt like a kid again. The pipes came into view under the moonlight, and I stopped and watched for movement. Seth would be no problem physically. I could take him down quickly. I even hoped that he had a gun, so after I killed him, I could claim self-defense. And still, no monster came after me. Now, I was the monster. All was quiet except the shallow waves slapping the bank. And since there was no movement, I began to think Seth had not come here. Disappointment took over, and I walked the last few feet toward the opening of the large pipe. When I entered, an odor of urine and rotting fish hit me like a slap in the face. I stepped back out and took an inventory of the items around me. There were smaller pipes laying randomly along the bank, some piled up on top of each other and others I could see farther away from the water. With my pistol in hand and the flashlight on, I lit the interior of the pipe. I expected to see Seth right away. Instead, I got that strong smell again. I crept forward to exit at the other end and searched the pipes beyond, and I felt the presence of someone else there. It was like a sixth sense. Even though I could not see them, I knew they were close. And I felt it before I heard it. A warm wind came down the pipe into my face, and my chest began to vibrate slightly. No one was in the pipe with me. I could see the end, but thick brush had grown up at the far side opening. The air I felt was a breath or an exhale from something. I could smell it, and I stopped. It screamed so loud and was amplified inside the concrete tunnel. Stunned and frozen, I shined the light straight ahead and I saw two glowing red eyes staring back at me, and they were wrapped in the silhouette of a giant creature crouching behind the brush. I fired 2 shots at it, and then it stood up. The top of the 6-foot pipe was at its chest level. This thing was huge. With one swift motion, he was on top of the pipe, moving to the other end. It dropped down and glared at me, and I shot twice more, hitting it with both. And the creature flinched and then roared. I had to get to the other end into a smaller pipe where he couldn't reach me. Not sure I could get there fast enough, I sprinted anyway. After crashing through the tangle of vines and bushes, I was looking straight into a much smaller pipe where I would fit, but the creature wouldn't. Over the rocks and weeds, I dove into the end and crawled. Its hand brushed my shoe as it reached inside to catch me. I was inside far enough. The tube was too small for me to turn around and face the beast. The end in front of me was 10 feet away and completely blocked by debris. I was trapped. So I waited periodically, trying to look over my shoulder at the thing after me, but it was pointless. Everything went quiet. I couldn't hear it now. No footsteps crunching in the rocks, no heavy breaths, no screams. And for a second, I thought it had given up and left, until the whole pipe was lifted into the air. He was turning it on its end and trying to shake me out. And when he lifted the end, the pipe cracked, giving me a handhold. I could feel myself in the pipe being lifted vertically and lowered several times. I could hear the beast's frustration when I didn't pop out the end, but I hung on for my life. Maybe out of frustration, or maybe from lack of interest, it finally pushed the end over and the pipe slammed onto another with a crash. I was on my back now, feet toward the ground at an angle and still unreachable from either end. And then one last lift dashed my hopes of surviving the night as it lifted the pipe, I suppose over its head, and threw 1,000 pounds of concrete and terrified human. My body tensed for the impact, and I expected the brittle cover to break apart enough for it to reach inside and pull me out, but it hadn't thrown me to the ground. The pipe and I sailed several feet in the air into the river. The cold water rushed in and shocked me, and if I crawled forward, I would be heading to the riverbed. Backing out of that broken pipe was difficult. My coat was hung on the reinforcing wire fabric, and it dug into my clothes, through into my flesh, but I pushed through it. My air was running out fast. My feet cleared the end of the pipe, and I only had a few more feet to go, and I would be free. One last push backward folded my coat over my head, so I allowed my body to relax enough to slip out of the heavy jacket. But without the coat, I was smaller, and I pushed free from the pipe. The river was shallow in this spot, and one easy push off the pipe upward sent me to the surface. My eyes searched the bank for the creature. It wasn't there. Thinking it had finished me off, I assumed it had left the area. And then a few strokes toward the bank until I felt the sandy bottom, and then I walked out of the water, frantically looking everywhere for my attacker, and still nothing came for me. What now? I thought. I had a long walk back home. I would freeze in this weather, but that was my only option. Before heading back up the bluff to my trail home, I looked for my gun and flashlight. And a few feet into the pile of discarded construction material, I saw the light I had dropped, and not far from the light, I saw my pistol laying in the leaves. And then I started straight up through the debris, working my way through the maze of pipes, trying not to break a leg. An injury now would be a death sentence. When I was clear of the pipes and up the bank a bit, I looked back over the area, and I saw the creature walking away from me in knee-deep water. The splashing had drawn my attention, and in the moonlight I could finally see its full form. Long legs stepped high in the water, and they carried a frame that no man could contend with in a fight. I expected it to return to the bank and head up the mountain where the bank leveled out, but instead it walked out deeper into the water and disappeared. The swirling of the slow current was all I could see on the surface. Patton Island was out there. Maybe that's where it was headed. The monster had come in and out of my life in a maddening, violent way, and I would never see it again. That moment was perhaps one of the most profound epiphanies of my life. For years, I had dreamed of becoming the monster that brought vengeance to my tormentors. And now, watching this magnificent creature walk away from me, I knew I was not, nor did I want to inflict the same terror on anyone as I had just experienced. I had just gone through something that few survive. It wasn't the size and vicious nature of the creature in that moment that brought on my epiphany. It was the image in my mind, still fresh as if I saw it an hour ago, of Seth's limp body hanging from the left hand of the beast. Seth's arm dangled free, and his fingers dipping into the surface, pushing a tiny wake. The beast had found its meal, and Seth, the rapist, vanished forever. I started for home, a changed man, wondering if I could make it back alive. On the side of the mountain, already feeling weak, I saw lights moving through the woods toward me. I stopped and yelled, and soon I was surrounded by searchers. Once they were sure that I wasn't Seth, they bundled me up and helped me get home. They all left after depositing me in the house except one deputy who stayed to make sure that I was not in serious hypothermia. After taking a hot shower and getting some microwave food in me, he and I sat at my table sipping coffee. And I explained that I had suspected Seth would be sheltering in those pipes since it was the only place he could have escaped the snow and wind. And then I lied and said that my plan was to hold him there until the searchers arrived. There was no need to say that I had planned to kill the guy for making fun of me. If by some strange event the creature didn't eat Seth that night and his corpse was found floating in the river, I might be implicated and questioned. I had fallen in the river like an idiot on the coldest night of January is what I told him, and then I headed straight for home, hoping to not freeze to death, and thank goodness that I had run into them. Not long after, and sure that I was healthy, the deputy left. Now, alone with my thoughts, all the repetitive visions I conjured every day over the years seemed to slip away. I wasn't a blooming serial killer after all. I felt sane for the first time since I was a kid. I slept well that night and woke the next morning to the news I already knew, that Seth the rapist had not been captured, but the search continued. And then, without hesitation, I walked out the door into the world with no fear, no anxiety. After finishing my paper route, I stopped at a local diner and ate a hearty breakfast, and I began to think of all the places I was now free to go. The monster was actually in the woods, not outside my door. Now, I was free.